here to share more about Live Free USA, the work they are doing to build community and reduce gun violence. To share some more perspective on recent headlines and to talk solutions, we have activist and community leader, a CNN champion of change, the national director of urban strategies for the Live Free campaign, and the lead pastor of the Way Christian Center, our very special guest, Pastor Mike McBride. This is the Black Information Network Daily Podcast, and I'm your host, Ramses Ja. All right, Pastor Mike McBride, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
Man, I'm great to be here with you, Brother Ramses Ja. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for the folks that are uninitiated, let's bring them up to speed. Let's share a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your upbringing, and sort of what led you to the path that you're on professionally.
Well, I am a native of San Francisco, California. I've born and raised in the Black church. I say I'm a fourth generation holiness Pentecostal, where we speak in tongues, we roll on the floor, we swing from the chandelier. Yep. On a good Sunday, we levitate. Somebody say,
I know all about it.
We grew up in all that.
Yes, sir.
And yet at the same time, I grew up in the kind of cauldron of the crack cocaine era, the epidemic that was happening in the 90s.
Sure.
So saw so many of friends, loved ones, community members being caught up in the violence, the addiction, the police brutality. I myself was physically and sexually assaulted by police officers in 1999 as a youth pastor. And I found my whole life just kind of existing in a state of dissonance, if you will, appreciating that you could do everything right and still find yourself abused and messed over by the police departments, by the system. And those who find themselves caught up in these cycles could never find a way out, even when they wanted to. I was a youth pastor. A number of my young people were telling me that these things happen to them all of the time, whether it's police violence, drug addiction, internal conflicts within the community. And I heard God speak to me and say, what is it about these children and their families that they'll trust you with the salvation of their souls, but not the safety of their bodies? And so that experience, my own personal trauma, it all kind of forged a vision of vocation, of ministry, to be a peacemaker, to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out how do we eliminate gun violence? How do we dismantle the prison industrial complex? How do we reimagine public safety, particularly as it relates to police encounters with our young people? And how do we ensure that we can live free from violence and death? And that has been the trajectory of my life for the past 25, 30 years. And it's been quite a journey.
I love it. So tell us a bit about a pivotal experience, a funeral experience that kind of, inspired you to do more.
Yeah, I was a counselor at a school. Continuation school is one of like my big commitments when I came home from college, right, was to, find the neighborhood where I was going to do ministry and just live there, work there. And so I got a job as a counselor at a continuation school. One of my young students, his name was Larry. We had got him graduated from high school. We thought if we can just get you out of school, then life is before you, right? You get a diploma, all that kind of stuff. And about 6 months after he graduated, he was killed in a liquor store right there on the border of North Oakland and Berkeley, the neighborhoods where we all were doing our ministry and our young people were traversing. It was particularly disheartening and devastating for a number of us because he was a super popular kid. He was hard to get through school. So his funeral was amazing. It was big. Hundreds of young people there. And as I eulogized him and provided my remarks, I began to ask how many young people in this service. It probably had to be like 400 or 500 young people have been to more than one funeral. All the young people lifted their hand. These are teenagers. I got to 5 funerals. Their hands are all still lifted. I got as high as 10 funerals and half of the young people still had their hands up weeping. And it was really, again, in that moment that I found that whatever I was doing, which I felt was a lot, it was not enough. And it forced me to think very differently about how I leverage my privilege, my education, my experience. Back then I was a slim 20-something-year-old youth pastor dude. So I looked like one of the kids, you know what I'm saying? I had proximity to the streets in the neighborhood, but I also was sitting in rooms with mayors and police chiefs and foundation folks and politicians. And so I could really bridge, you know what I'm saying, a lot of those different spaces. And that funeral, along with just the trauma of the young people and parents. I mean, and I lost several other young people after that, a young woman, a couple young guys. So it all just kind of really hit a tipping point for me. And I devoted the rest of my ministry and life to making sure that I would never not have a day go by where I was not trying to help our communities live free from this violence.
Sure. So speaking of Live Free, tell us about your organization, Live Free USA, and the values and visions and outcomes that you're seeking.
Yeah, Live Free USA started out as a campaign to end gun violence and mass incarceration inside the Faith in Action Network, which was one of the largest faith-based organizing organizations in the country. Live Free emerged out of so many pastors, faith leaders, mothers, fathers who were burying their children and their young adults far too early. We began to research nationally the kind of strategies that were being used to do two things at the same time: decrease gun violence and decrease mass incarceration. We felt that you could not radically change the Black community without doing both of those things at the same time. There's some people who work on the public safety alone, or some people who work on the incarceral work alone. We felt like you had to do both because both of these issues were literally devastating our communities. So we began to look at models in Boston and Cincinnati and Chicago, and brought a lot of the architects of those models called Ceasefire or Cure Violence or the Violence Interrupters. And we began to bring all of those models into a conversation with one another and help to forge a comprehensive response that helped to contribute to 50% of gun-related shootings and homicides in Oakland. These models at the same time were working in cities like New York, led by the indomitable Erica Ford and MT, folks there who were seeing massive reductions in gun violence in their neighborhoods or their parts of the boroughs. We saw Boston in the Dorchester neighborhoods getting a 60-70% reduction in violence. So we saw these strategies working. But what was so fascinating to us is that people didn't know about them. Mm-hmm. Right.
So what strategies are we talking about? Yeah.
So the strategies, we call them community violence intervention strategies. But the premise is very simple. If you have 100 shootings in your community, it's not because you have 100 people shooting. It's because you have a small number of individuals. The data tells us is less than 1% of your whole city's population is driving about 60% of the violence. Right. So the strategies, almost with surgical precision, focus on those individuals who are caught in these violent conflicts, and you do a set of targeted interventions with them. You may bring them into a meeting and you may talk to them and let them know we love you, but you have to end the violence, or there may be some targeted enforcement going your way. But if you take advantage of the resources we're giving you, jobs, mental health support, relocation services, then you will find yourself out of harm's way. We have hood social workers or violence interrupters or VIPs, violence interruption professionals, who literally go into these conflicts in the neighborhoods unarmed and use our street credibility, our de-escalation training, our CBT trainings, and we do cognitive behavioral therapy and support with the young men, connect them to services, help them be rehabilitated. These strategies work, but they have to be scaled up. And so when we scale these strategies up, we see immediate reductions within 6 to 9 months in a lot of the places where we do the work. And that has been what we've been working on literally for the past decade, kind of mainstreaming these strategies and ensuring they get the right technical assistance for implementation and resources for scale and sustainability.
Listening to you talk about that, I saw your segment on CNN, the Champion for Change segment, and you spoke about gun deaths specifically resulting from interpersonal conflict.
That's right.
And how that needs to be recognized as a public health crisis. And it seems like you're taking steps toward that. So for folks that don't know, explain what that means so that they can make the connection that I'm making.
So when we say that gun violence needs to be seen as a public health issue, what we're saying is there are other disciplines in our society that could be leveraged to address the violence that often is a result of people's unaddressed trauma, anger, fear, and pain. Much of this violence, particularly in interpersonal conflicts, groups, gangs, cliques, etc., they are literally a multi-generational conflict that has likely resulted in some individual either being victimized by violence or being a perpetrator of violence. Now, what is so interesting about this is most victims of gun violence never get treated as a victim. They immediately get treated as a criminal, right? They are questioned by the police. They are not offered much protection. They become overly kind of criminalized, have disproportionate police context, even if they themselves
Or the victim
have been shot. A public health strategy would afford victimization. It would afford services. It would afford just another way to respond to what, again, is a public health reality. If you get shot and you literally have injury in your body and you need hospital support, you need mental health support, that is a public health response. But most Black people never get public health responses to the worst conditions in our lives. We constantly get, as the first arm of the government's response, policing, incarceration, some kind of punitive or violent response as a way to try to create peace on the other side. We're just saying, let's broaden the disciplines used in our society to respond even to violent crime, because we know that if someone is perpetuating violence on someone else, it is likely because they themselves have been victimized by violence and have never had an opportunity to have a healing mental health or wellness response to them. And then there are some folks who will need a response around rehabilitation, et cetera, but that ought not to be the only solution on the table.
Now, you've kind of talked around a lot of the things that we've been covering on this show recently, mental health being one of the foremost, and also, gun violence. And around here, we cover a lot of the high profile gun violence incidents or incidents of harm against Black people. And I want to get your thoughts on, the recent events. This past 2 weeks has been really, really intense, from, the shooting in Atlanta at the hospital to, Jordan Neely being choked out on the F train in New York, to there was a mass shooting, I want to say 2 days ago in New Mexico, obviously in Allen, Texas. So I want to get your thoughts on the broader issue. I know that you deal primarily with, Black and brown communities, but I want to get your thoughts on the broader issue, at least how it looks to you, because a lot of us, we just read the headlines. We're not really involved. What are your thoughts on this past couple of weeks?
I lift up Banco Brown, a Black trans loved one who was killed here in San Francisco by a security guard.
Yes.
On video, we were all told that, Banco Brown was lunging at the security guard.
Yeah, we saw the video.
And it's just like, come on, bro. So generally, I believe several things. Certainly as a faith leader, I do believe that our country is caught in a spiral of death dealing that is ubiquitous, right? We according to Dr. Martin Luther King, he said this powerfully: the United States is the largest exporter of death and military in the world.
Sure.
Right? The origins of our country, as we know, without sounding hyperbolic, it has emerged out of genocide. It has emerged out of theft and out of murder and mayhem. And so these are the seeds that have been planted in this soil. And as Malcolm X said, it appears the chickens have been coming home to roost. And sadly, in the Black community, because we have been produced from this soil as both victims and in some ways participatory in this violence, we ourselves, I think, are unable to extract ourselves from both the symptoms and the actual problems. I certainly believe that the issue of gun violence in this country is a preventable response to violence and death. We have a proliferation of weapons in our communities, although the assault weapons get the largest, kind of narrative in our country, as they should. These are weapons of war. They should not be in any civilians' hands. They should not be in a metropolitan, a highly populated area. These are guns that are manufactured by gun companies to serve in war zones. Handguns, though, are the number one cause of gun deaths in this country, whether they are suicides, whether they're accidental shootings, whether they are interpersonal violence, whether it's intimate partner or even conflicts between, community members. So we have an epidemic around handguns as well. The presence of a gun, according to all the research, says that you are more likely to be harmed, you or a family member, by that gun than it is to be used as an act of self-defense. And so there are myths around guns and weapons that we have to peel apart. It is hard to peel apart that myth because our country, again, weaponizes fear, and we are so afraid of one another. We have, I believe, irrational fear of folks who are not like us, who don't live where we live, who don't share our experiences. And so it is, to me, endemic. It is a expression of the soul sick country we live in. And we have a lot of work to change laws, change hearts and minds, but more than anything, figure out how can we shed the fear that causes us to feel like we need to have this violence or these guns or these weapons in order to feel safe.
Sure. You're a powerful speaker. I see why you are a pastor. So let's lean into that then. You're the lead pastor at the Way Christian Center. This is in Berkeley, California. So tell us about the Way. Tell us about your goals with that ministry, and just for folks that haven't been, bring us up to speed.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, the Way Church is a Pentecostal congregation, meaning that we are kind of birthed out of the Pentecostal tradition. We're a non-denominational denominational congregation, which means that we have lots of folks from different Christian backgrounds. We even have folks who are post-Christian or agnostic, people who just, don't understand their faith journey, but they find a home at the Way. I've been pastoring as the lead pastor there since 2005. It's our family church, been in existence since 1973. I've kind of put a 21st century spin on it, but we live at the intersection of faith, justice. We talk about decolonizing our faith, meaning what does it mean to hold on to the things that actually are life-giving in our faith tradition and shed those things that too frequently are being used to fragment us and cause us to not see one another's humanity. And I have found, particularly as we've endured this pandemic, that our country has done us all a huge disservice by not giving us all a chance to pause and grieve and mourn the 1 million+ lives who've been lost to this pandemic. It has, I think, triggered a level of collective trauma that we, I think, need to lean into our faith traditions, our cultural kind of practices. We need to extract ourselves from these kind of overcommitments to the machinery, the digitalization, the virtualization of our society that has kind of made us all into these inanimate images and objects. We have lost the ability to hug, to touch, to sit, to grieve, to mourn with one another. And we have tried. Our church is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a mega church, a couple hundred members, but we have tried to help facilitate that through the way in which we live out our faith. And so I do believe that it's important to not allow our faith to be hijacked by the Christo-fascists of this country, the white supremacists, those who serve a Jesus that is in their own image making, if you will, that we need to practice a faith, regardless of your faith, that is liberatory, that is life-giving, that makes space for people to find their humanity and thereby hopefully steward creation in a way that does not cause devastation and harm. And that's a part of why we do the work the way we do it, because we know that faith is an important part in so many people's lives, and we don't want to let the white supremacists of this country hijack faith and evacuate it of its impact.
Say that. That's all right. Okay. All right. So in addition to being a faith leader, you're also on the roster of experts working with the Square One Project. So tell our listeners a bit about this organization and some of the initiatives that you're working on.
Yes, Square One's a dope project that is a part of the Columbia Justice Lab. Some really cool folks in Columbia University in New York who have had this vision for, I think, the last 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer than that, maybe decade, have been gathering criminal justice experts, judges, lawyers, law enforcement leaders, activists, directly impacted folks, formerly incarcerated individuals, to reimagine what would a justice system look like if we started at square one, right? Rather than trying to figure out how do we change the system based off of where we are today, it is an opportunity to say, what if we were trying to reimagine a whole different system from its inception, taking into account the issues of racism, of sexism, of class, and all the other kind of intersectional realities that impact those who are most vulnerable to the criminal justice system. What does it mean to actually start from square one? And it has been a powerful collective of folks across the country. I think this kind of incubator, if you will, has created lots of policy shifts and changes across the country that most people may or may not be fully aware of. But issues around bail reform, or issues around now parsimony, or this idea that we can have justice without extracting a huge human toll and price on families and community members, right? This idea of how we reimagine the public safety system. So using some of these violence intervention strategies that are public health collaborations with rehabilitation systems, law enforcement, mental health, et cetera. So Square One has been a really powerful and important space, and I'm super excited to be perhaps joining as a fellow at Columbia University next semester to do some teaching and sharing of some of our work. What we do believe is that if this country is going to survive, and I think it's important for us to appreciate, as I always say, that countries, empires fall, but the people outlast every government, the land outlasts every government. Mm-hmm. And so we must not become overly preoccupied with a static imagination of what a government has been or looks like today. We must always have this kind of forward-thinking, futuristic sensibility of what kind of world are we creating, so our children, our grandchildren, if we can fix the ecological crisis, our progenitors can actually have a world to inherit. What does it mean for us to actually imagine that forward in the future? And we do think that this is a big part of our work. If we're going to survive, we have to think of a different construction of a more just and humane society. And the only way the United States survives in its current form is to go that way.
Yeah.
If it does not go that way, then it will implode. And we're seeing some of that today. And so that process then requires some of us to construct and reconstruct it into something that indeed reaches these aspirations and ideals.
Sure, sure. Now you're getting pulled in a lot of directions, and they all are amazing. But I can't let you go without having you talk to us about the Live Free USA Archaeology of Silence speaker series. So share a bit about that too.
So, one of the biggest commitments we've made in Live Free is to take seriously that people's meaning making and biases and assumptions are often an unconscious part of their life, right? Lots of data and research on mind science that talks about how, a lot of our ideas are constructed in our subconscious. The things that penetrate our subconscious are art, music, right? Things that are less kind of abrasively in your face, and things that kind of cause you to use a different part of your mind and your spirit and your soul. We, along with the DeYoung Museum and Google, have partnered to help amplify an exhibit that has been masterfully created by Kehinde Wiley. For you who do not know who Kehinde Wiley is, he is an internationally recognized artist and painter, sculptor. He originates from South Central Los Angeles. Wonderful brother who famously, most recently, most folks may have found about his work. He painted the President Obama portrait.
Sure. Okay. That's ringing a bell.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like his style. He uses lots of Roman decor, flowers and colors or whatever. During the 2020 pandemic, while he was in Senegal and was watching the uprisings related to Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, he was inspired to create paintings and sculptures that captured what he called the silencing of Black bodies against the backdrop of the beautiful kind of creation of both nature, but also the kind of rugged contours of empire. And so he used Roman decor as kind of like his ode to the kind of rugged contours of empire. He used obviously nature and lots of clothing brands to capture the intrinsic value, right, connected to Black bodies, but then showed very powerfully the way in which Black bodies are silenced through death. Amongst all of this powerful backdrop of empire and art and creation. It is a powerful 1819 piece exhibit. We have been curating a speaker series for the next 6 months. We're bringing mothers who've lost their children to state violence, fathers who've lost their children and sons to state violence. We're bringing together artists and entertainers, athletes, activists to talk about intersectionality, to talk about gender, to talk about the ways in which these systems silence our loved ones. We're talking about what it means to build an intergenerational kind of revolutionary through line. So we're not finding ourselves divided around both class and age. We're talking about reparations and reparative harm practices that can take place. So this has been a very powerful opportunity to use the art to spark a different conversation. And why we found this was important. We have, for the last 2-3 years, found a lot of clear signs that both the Democrats and certainly the Republicans are trying to push our country back to a tough on crime response to the worst conditions in our community, notwithstanding the challenges we have around violence. But it's important to appreciate that the spike in violence could largely, if not singularly, be attributed to the global pandemic, a once in a generation global pandemic that has literally carved and hollowed out a whole generation of elders and caretakers and caregivers, totally devastated the economy for low wage and middle wage workers, have exploded the unhoused population. So people are now so desperate they're living outside and having to turn to illegal practices of robbing and stealing just to make their ends meet. Now we all can have all the moral outrage to the crime, but we also need to have more outrage to the systems that perpetuate this poverty and have more compassion towards those who find themselves caught in those cycles.
That situation, yeah.
Yeah, this exhibit hopefully is an opportunity to remind us of the vulnerability, the tenderness of Black bodies against the backdrops of these very rugged systems, and give us another narrative opportunity to hopefully reel in, if no one else, the Black community, the brown community, progressive white folks into another conversation about how we respond to these very real challenges without going back to a lock them up, police them brutally, and a mass incarceration framework of the failed 90s and 2000s.
Indeed. You got a lot going on. Before we let you go,
there's a lot going on in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm beyond impressed. I work in the same space, in the social justice space. And so I'm inspired just listening to you talk. So I want to make sure that our listeners who are inspired, they can plug in with you as well. Before we get to all of your socials and website stuff and all that, let's kind of go back. I want to talk a little bit more about the way and the live groups. So let's explain what that is to our listeners.
So live groups are the small group formation and discipleship groups that we use instead of relying on a Bible study, traditional Bible study alone that is taught by the pastors. We try to empower our church members, our loved ones in our congregation to facilitate group conversations and Bible studies and life spaces where they can meet once a week or twice a month to grow in their faith, to wrestle with the toughest questions of the day, to build relationships and hopefully have meaningful encounters with God that are done in community and not in isolation. It's just a small group discipleship framework that we've used for the past decade, and most kind of growing and vibrant congregations across the country kind of use these kind of small group studies because, a lot of people want to have relationships. People are lonely, people are isolated. And so it's for us a way to try to combat against that. And we're rolling out new life groups here in the Bay Area. We've been doing that since Easter. And so, folks are plugging in and getting together.
Nice. Now, for folks who are in the Bay and want to get out and support, let's let them know how they can support you. And then we're gonna talk about folks nationally, because I know there's going to be folks who want to support you, but maybe they're not based in the Bay.
Yeah, if you're in the Bay Area, obviously our church is back open for in-person gatherings. We still have virtual gatherings as well. We meet every Sunday at 10 a.m. And we have a nice, full, brisk 75-minute to 90-minute service that's filled with lots of loud singing, and we
that's the way it should be.
Yeah, we say we shout at God just in case He can't hear us. Nah, and have, I think, a great preaching teaching ministry. So we'll love to have folks join us in person. We're also, obviously, we have a YouTube channel that streams a lot of our materials. We are on Facebook as well, although folks are kind of fleeing Facebook. So yeah, in-person, digital, virtual spaces, and just come hang out with us. We're super chill groups of folks. If you like to get involved in our justice and peacemaking work, we also have wonderful organizations that we are in partnership with. Love Not Blood, Families United for Justice. We have Brothers Supporting Brothers who do some of our violence intervention work. We have partners like Urban Peace Movement, We just had a super dope event yesterday in Lake Mary that brought all the hip hop and loved ones out and just had a dope event. We're just trying to work roots clinics, which are in East Oakland, that provide powerful services led by Dr. Noha. I call her the Black Surgeon General of Oakland, right? She's brilliant about anything related to medicine, public health, COVID. So we're part of a larger network, you know what I'm saying? And we want to be a part of a network. There is no silver bullet that is about individualism. Collaboration is the way in which we defeat these problems we have. So yeah, come rock with us. You can certainly reach out to us in any kind of capacity, and we'll get you plugged in wherever you feel passionate about.
All right. Now let's make sure we're a little bit more specific. Let's plug rather the Facebook and Instagram, YouTube you mentioned, website, all that, just so folks know where to find you exactly.
Yeah, so if you want to, obviously I'm the tip of the spear in a lot of these different places. So my Instagram and Twitter handles are Pastor Mike. I'm sorry, I'm Pastor Mike. I am Pastor Mike _. And you can type that in and you'll find me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. You can find us all there. Our Instagram and Twitter handles for Live Free is Live Free USA, at Live Free USA, and you'll find us there as well. And you can always send us messages via the chats, or you can also follow up with us on email info@livefreeusa.org or Pastor Mike at livefreeusa.org. So, everything is easy to find us, and we're very responsive and we'd love to build with you all. There are 3 ways we often invite folks to kind of rock with us. We say put some DAP on it. It's an acronym that stands for donate, advocate, and participate.
I like that.
So we're constantly asking folks to imagine, as the loonies say, I got 5 on it, right? Put 5 or 10 or 20 or 100, whatever you can. The revolution must be funded, right? And the healing work has to have organizers and freedom fighters that can do this work, while the rest of us are, doing the work we can to take care of our families and steward creation, as we say. So donate to us directly. We are a nonprofit 501c3, so all of it is tax deductible. Advocate. We have online petitions and sometimes in-person lobby days at the local, state, and federal level. So you advocating, you writing your senators, your congress members, your mayors, our governors, our state reps, you'll be surprised how just a consistent stream of advocacy by directly impacted families and communities helps create a tipping point for elected officials that they cannot ignore. And then participate. It gives you an opportunity to do more than just be a Twitter or social media warrior, right? We need people to get out into the neighborhoods, get out into the streets, show up at city council meetings, take a day off work or a Saturday and help us love and hug and heal some folks. So donate, advocate, participate are 3 ways to get involved and help us live free from the violence and the harm that too often visits our communities.
Well, sir. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. And of course, I appreciate the path that you're on. You're an inspiring person. I know I'm inspired, and I'll speak for our listeners because, we do this every day. This is an inspired conversation. So I thank you for your time. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, today's guest is activist, community leader, CNN champion of change, the national director of urban strategies for the Live Free campaign, and the lead pastor of the Way Christian Center, our very special guest, Pastor Mike McBride.